Buongiorno, oggi presentiamo la prima di una serie di interviste realizzate dal professor Musialowski ad Hannover in Germania per il concorso LAGUNANDO e in particolare per la sezione di Versi Verdi. Di Versi Verdi si occupa più strettamente delle interconnessioni fra natura e cultura. La domanda che ci facciamo è come si può creare una consapevolezza della crisi ambientale attraverso la letteratura. Nell'intervista che vedremo, il professor Michal Musialowski interroga uno dei maggiori poeti nigeriani, il professor Emmanuel Egya, e lo interroga su questi temi e in particolare sull'ecocritica. È bene ricordare che l'ecocritica spazia in tutti i tipi di ambienti e in tutte le forme di vita. Inoltre tutti i generi letterari si rivelano significativi: la poesia, la narrativa, il teatro, il cinema e la saggistica. Allora, Michal, volevamo capire quali iniziative stai conducendo per il progetto di Versi Verdi lì ad Hannover.
Per ora il lavoro qua, da questa parte, da parte mia, si è concentrato sul lavoro di networking con i vari autori che vivono all'estero, qua in Germania, per promuovere il concorso, ma anche è stato quello di lavorare sulle interviste e di condurre dei discorsi con finora due personalità di rilievo nel campo dell'ambiente. E quindi sì, questi sono stati i due fronti su cui mi sono mosso principalmente.
Un'altra cosa che volevamo capire è come sei venuto in contatto con il grande poeta e letterato nigeriano Emmanuel Egya.
È una storia interessante che inizia con il mio lavoro di tesi magistrale, per cui ho deciso di fare un periodo di ricerca di 7 settimane in Nigeria. Attraverso questo progetto ho conosciuto il professor Egya, che mi ha permesso di realizzarlo e che l'ha sia coordinato che supervisionato e l'ha reso possibile. E in questo viaggio per me è stato molto rivoluzionario da molti punti di vista, mi ha aperto gli occhi su molte cose, e con il professor Egya siamo sempre rimasti in contatto a parlare, spesso anche di cose semplici, ma altre volte di discorsi filosofici, di scambi di punti di vista in una prospettiva di un dialogo aperto. Perché quello di cui mi sono reso conto è che la comunicazione fra Africa e l'Europa ha dei macigni molto pesanti sulle spalle ed è sempre filtrata dal colonialismo, dal passato e anche dal presente nella forma del neocolonialismo dell'Europa verso l'Africa. E c'è così tanto bisogno di un dialogo in un'altra dimensione, di un dialogo filosofico dove possiamo condividere le conoscenze e iniziare a considerare le conoscenze africane molto antiche, molto forti, come valide, come prospettive valide, perché forse in questo siamo noi europei un po' arroganti, pensando che solo le nostre idee siano le migliori.
Che importanza ha la letteratura e l'educazione ambientale e in che modo essa influisce sulla sopravvivenza dell'ambiente umano e non umano?
È una domanda molto interessante e anche molto profonda. Profonda nel senso che ha le radici così profonde come l'umanità stessa, perché in realtà la letteratura, ricordiamo qua la letteratura è sia quella scritta sia quella orale, è esistita fin dal primo pianto del bambino, del primo bambino del mondo. La poesia, l'oralità è nata lì. Quindi è sempre stata la letteratura, la poesia, l'oralità in ogni forma, la musica, sono sempre stati portatori di cultura, di pensiero, di filosofia e di civiltà in questo senso. Quindi come hanno sempre funzionato, funzionano anche oggi. E hanno lo stesso compito di fare quasi da cassa da risonanza, da impeto a dei movimenti e anche ai movimenti riguardo all'ambiente. Se prendiamo ad esempio l'esempio che avete menzionato voi dell'umano e del non umano, io trovo questo pensiero molto affascinante perché è da un lato ovvio che ci sia dell'umano e del non umano nell'ambiente, ma dall'altro sembra che attraverso il capitalismo, l'industrializzazione e lo sfruttamento delle risorse, cioè il modo in cui ci siamo approcciati all'ambiente, ci abbia fatto dimenticare di quanti altri esseri umani e non umani vivono con noi e del rapporto che abbiamo noi con loro e loro con noi, che non è un rapporto di simbiosi, come invece dovrebbe essere, ma è un rapporto di sfruttamento e di violenza da parte nostra. In questo squilibrio credo che soccomberemo se andremo avanti così. Quindi la letteratura ha un compito molto importante in questo senso, credo.
È molto importante questa intervista, godetevela veramente.
As we know, you have written more than 100 scholarly articles, literary essays on different topics, and definitely you're an expert on Nigerian poetry and on Nigerian poetry in the world. So my first question would be, what is eco-criticism and how would you define it, and what is your work in eco-criticism, how it can be linked to literature, and what is this field about?
All right, thank you very much. Eco-criticism is actually a theoretical discourse that began in North America. It started from the United States with the works of scholars over there. And it has spread across Europe. And today we have many scholars in Europe and in other parts of the world who are engaged in eco-criticism. But I as a scholar, you know, before I went into eco-criticism, I was doing scholarship in other sub-areas, other areas of interest, such as post-colonialism and perhaps you could say feminism. I was in those areas working before I got to pick interest in eco-criticism. And my scope of research has usually been the Nigerian space. And most of my writings are about Nigerian literature. So I see eco-criticism as a discourse that links literature and environment, and it looks at environment from a very wide scope. Environment encompassing not just the physical environment, but the spiritual environment and other aspects of environment. In fact, the totality of biodiversity in ecosystems. So, and I like to look at them from an African perspective, especially from Nigerian perspective. So I argue in my book for what I call the Nigerian variance of eco-criticism. And that is taken from an African variance of eco-criticism, which itself is a derivation from post-colonial eco-criticism. And what are the specific points that underscore this variance? We argue that since eco-criticism has to do with literature, culture, and environment, it means that specific environments should be looked at. Localities, local issues should be looked at. So we do not want to begin the study of eco-criticism from a global perspective, from a universal perspective. We would prefer to start the study of eco-criticism from a local perspective, where we deal with local specificities, local particularities. And that is why, for instance, in Africa, the spiritual sphere, as you know, is very robust. You know, we believe in spiritualities, we believe in the unseen. And we want to think that this unseen is also part of the environment that needs studying in eco-criticism. So this is a brief explanation I can give. So my study, my personal research has moved from environmental justice eco-criticism and is now towards what I call the physical world, the eco-criticism of the non-human world. What are non-human beings that live with us, and how can we give them credence in our study? And this I try to link with what emerged in Europe as a material eco-criticism, that as you and I are talking, there are many things, material things that are involved. Of course, you have the desk that you are writing with, you have the pen, you have the paper that you are writing, we have the device that, all of them are matters, and they are material things, and they are involved in this conversation. So this conversation is not just between Michal and Sule, but also the pen we use, the device we use, the digital material we use to conduct this research are also part of, these conversations are also part of the conversation. So we would learn to recognize the importance and the significance of the material things that we use.
Io volevo dire che Egya è molto affascinante e anche molto competente nella sua materia, soprattutto nell'ecocritica. Credo che lui mostri una visione diversa, molto aperta nel mondo della natura e della letteratura, e affronta anche un problema filosofico e poetico. Cosa ne pensi tu di questo?
Sì, io penso, nella mia piccola esperienza, quello che ho sperimentato io con la poesia e con la creazione, con l'espressione creativa, anche attraverso la mia esperienza con il progetto Blank Pages, è stato il fatto che la letteratura, l'arte, la poesia costruiscono dei ponti immediati e genuini, che non hanno bisogno di nessun tipo di mediazione, perché l'espressione creativa si basa sull'emozione, sulla lettura e interpretazione dell'emozione, e questo funziona anche fra diverse lingue. Se una poesia viene ad esempio letta in arabo e io la sento, pur non capendo le parole, riesco a percepire delle dimensioni emotive e comunque interagisco con questa poesia, apro delle porte verso una comunicazione che è più profonda di quella, ad esempio, dei social media. È solo un esempio, ma comunque questo è il punto. Quindi io credo che il grande... quello che la letteratura, il grande cambiamento che la letteratura sta portando e porterà ancora di più, è insegnarci di comunicare in un modo diverso e insegnarci di considerare le emozioni nella nostra comunicazione e di dimenticare di andare oltre le categorie che sono esistite per secoli, le categorie di una che penso sia veramente pesante come blocco di comunicazione, il nazionalismo. Io credo che il nazionalismo, come è vissuto spesso dalle destre e come è vissuto spesso da certe persone, è assolutamente controproducente per un dialogo interculturale. perché parte da una prospettiva di arroganza, direi. Quindi dialogo è la parola chiave in cui io credo, e credo anche che la poesia sia il mezzo giusto per portare questo cambiamento. Very interesting. Thank you very much. I think it is a very interesting and inspiring overview to see how you moved from post-colonialism through feminism to eco-criticism, which I think these three fields must be and are also connected, and they deal also with common issues. But I am very interested in this spiritual aspect that you have mentioned, and also the non-human that you mentioned, the material that you mentioned. My question would be, so the material criticism, or the physical world, as you call it, is the non-human dimension of objects that are part of a conversation or that are part of an environment. Is also the spiritual part involved in this non-material in this material physical things, or is it another sphere?
Yeah. So, first of all, we have the human and the non-human. So, in an environment, you have human and you have the non-human. Now, in the non-human, you can also break into two. You have the living non-human, such as living things, a dog, for example, a goat, for example, an elephant, for example, is a non-human living thing. Then you have the non-human, non-living thing, like the specs that we are wearing, like the clothes we put on, like the ground, like the wall, like the ceiling. All these material things, these are non-human. So these are non-living things that are also non-human. So you can even see that if you divide eco-criticism to human and non-human perspectives, the non-human perspectives is actually larger because it encompasses both living things and non-living things. Whereas the human angle is only about about living things, which is what we are, human beings. The only thing is that all this while, before now, we have always claimed superiority over these other non-human material and living things. But in fact, they are more than us in terms of population, in terms of endurance. Some of them don't die, while we human beings, we die. Some of them live forever. Some of them are very useful to us and all of that. So it's a very huge range. It's a big range of different lives. Look at the bacteria in our body. How, and today in material eco-criticism, we are talking about corporeality, the body, the interactions of different bodies within the human body. You know, in our body as human beings, we carry bacteria, we carry viruses, we carry other lives, you know, that are also not human lives. So this is the way everything is intermeshed. And eco-criticism is looking to see that we recognize the existence of these other non-human lives, whether they are living or non-living things.
Very interesting and exhaustive. Thank you very much. So would you say that in some way we have colonized the non-human things in a strange way of neo-colonial thinking or of colonial thinking, or would it be too far to claim this?
No. That is exactly what it is. Up till now, until eco-criticism came, we had colonized. We had not only colonized, we had tried to silence. We have tried to erase the existence of these other beings. But with the coming of eco-criticism, we are now saying you do not have to erase their existence. You do not have to take credence over them. You do not even have to take, for instance, the credit that should be given to them. For example, if you are moving around, having a walk with your dog, with Polly, for instance, you're having a walk with Polly, and then as you move from one place to the other, Polly is keeping you company, you know, and then as you interact with people, Polly also has a way of reacting to the way you are interacting. So at the end of the day, you will say, okay, I went out for a walk and I interacted with maybe Mr. Butler, but then you forget to say that, oh, Polly and I went out for a walk and we interacted, you know, because as a human being, you feel that the dog does not have any agency, or the dog is under your own colonization, under your own control. You decide everything for the dog, you know, and as a result of that, you try to erase the existence of the dog, even in places where you should mention that the dog also contributed, you know, to some of the things that you did while you were taking a walk. So these are the issues we are talking about.
Egya è anche molto affascinante perché si riferisce alla natura e tutte le sue forme umane e non umane, riportandoci a un mondo africano e una spiritualità veramente straordinaria. Cosa ti è parsa questa nuova interpretazione più poetica e spirituale in Egya?
Dire che professor Egya è veramente un accademico di spicco in questo campo ed è un accademico di spicco nel campo della letteratura. Quindi anche io provo una grande fascinazione per le sue parole e l'umiltà e l'energia con cui le trasmette. Quindi io penso che sia anche sbagliato generalizzare l'Occidente sotto una sola categoria e anche condannare l'Occidente solo a cose negative. Quello che credo io è che l'Occidente, avendo vissuto una forte industrializzazione, capitalizzazione, neoliberalismo e tutte le cose che sono arrivate, abbia perso, abbia devastato, abbia distrutto certi collegamenti alla natura, alle tradizioni, al sapere locale, al sapere regionale, che include la natura anche in Europa. Io sono sicuro che in Veneto, se noi andiamo a guardare secoli fa, il rapporto con la natura delle popolazioni in Veneto era diverso. E quindi la vedo più come un'interruzione, più che una falsa partenza. Quindi credo che siamo ancora in modo di recuperare e di aggiustare il corso delle cose. Credo che abbiamo tutti vissuto un fascino molto forte verso il capitalismo, il benessere, la globalizzazione, ma adesso anche con la pandemia ci rendiamo conto che va rivista. E forse va rivista anche da questo punto di vista del rapporto con l'ambiente, con la natura, e lì possiamo certamente imparare dall'Africa. L'ultima cosa che volevo aggiungere solo sull'umano e sul non umano è la dimensione spirituale, che in Europa sembra essere debole, perché viene solo identificata con le religioni predominanti che ci sono in Europa, ma la spiritualità deve essere intesa come qualcosa che va oltre la religione, ma è un modo di connettere con la natura. Wow, it's very eye-opening actually to think about it and to think also about how we use the language to talk about animals, to say, this is my dog, I'm going out with...
Yeah, this is my dog. Yeah, this is my pet, you know, my pet.
Right. It is my possession.
You see how condescending that language is.
Right, right. And it's very refreshing to look at it from a different perspective. And is it something, this view of nature and of the surrounding world that is part of everything, but that we do not possess, is it something linked to traditional Nigerian wisdom or rituals tradition, or is it a new emerging mentality?
I didn't get your question. Sorry, can you repeat what you said?
Yes, so my question, can we find this mentality, you know, that maybe eco-criticism wants to establish, that the nature is around us but lives with us, so it's not only you know, an object. Is it present in the Nigerian philosophy and tradition since a long time, or is it a new thought, a new mentality?
Yeah, this is a question I love so much. You know why I love this question? This is because those of us who are doing eco-criticism from Africa, we are now arguing that what the West is looking at as eco-criticism is actually what has been existing with us. We've been living with it for long. You know, it is part of our philosophy. It is part of our how do you call it? Our ontology. In Africa, ritual guides. You have and in form of trees, in form of rivers, water streams. For instance, when a child is born in my place, for instance, they would usually find out whether that child is connected to a river, is connected to water, is connected to a tree, is connected to a stone somewhere in the forest. So these are things that we have been living with for a long time. And that is why my current book, I am trying to show that in our literature of the pre-colonial period, our literature of the early period, early African literature, I want to show how the connection between the living and the non-living was demonstrated in that literature, to argue that this kind of connection between the non-living and the living existed for a long time in Africa. And as a matter of fact, the colonial Christians, the colonial masters who came to Africa, tried to discourage it. They looked at it as a form of paganism. They look at it as a form of, it was a paganistic practice to say that human beings were connected to non-material, to material things, to non-living things. So the colonial people the colonial masters also came and tried to get Africans to not to think about this connection with material things. But it never stopped it, because in spite of Christianity, in spite of Islam, we in Africa are highly connected to our spiritual beings. We believe that wherever we exist, there are spirits that exist with us, and these spirits manifest themselves in form of an object, maybe a staff, a stick. It manifests in form of a stone, in form of water, maybe a pond, and in form of a tree. So we can look upon a tree as a goddess or as a god, and we can begin to worship that tree or get attached to that tree in order to see that our spirit, the spirit other, is recognized, is paid attention. Attention is paid to the spirit other. So this is a practice that has existed in Africa for a very long time.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting. And so poetry, does poetry has so what is the role of poetry in this regard? Does poetry record this? And because when I think about your poetry collection, for example, What the Sea Told Me, and about the symbol of the sea, I can see this connection, but also who came to my mind is Remi Raji, Nil Osundari, who you have studied. And it seems almost, as you say, that these tropes are transversal to many generations of Nigerian writers. So, so what is, how is poetry involved in this?
Yeah, so poetry has involved in this practice since the beginning. You know, poetry was the first art, you know, in Africa, just like in the world, you can say poetry is the first art of the three genres. So in the 1940s, when the first poem in Nigeria emerged, if you study the poems that were written in the first generation, and if you study poets like Gabriel Okara, Christopher Okigbo, J.P. Clark, and Wole Soyinka, who wrote in the colonial time, you will realize that most of them are talking about this connection. And let me give you an example, which is what you also find in my own poetry, what the Sea told me. Christopher Okigbo has a very famous poem that is titled, is titled The Passage. It's titled The Passage. And in The Passage, I think the first stanza, let me just paraphrase the first stanza. The first stanza says, "Before you, Mother Idoto, I stand naked, a prodigal." You understand? This is like, I am just paraphrasing the first stanza of the poem. And when you read the poem, you realize that Mother Idoto, that the poet's persona is referring to, is actually a goddess, a river goddess. So the story is told that Okigbo grew up in a village where there was a stream, and in that stream, the stream was called Idoto, and that stream was worshipped. And he is writing this poem about that stream. And he says, "Before you, Mother Idoto, I stand naked, a prodigal," which is to say, I surrender myself to you as my goddess. And if you read the poem down, you will realize that the poet is arguing that as an educated boy, I went to the Western world, I got the Western civilization, but I realized that all the Western knowledge and civilization that I have got are not as important to me as you, my goddess. So in spite of my straying away to join the Western civilization, I have decided to come back to you, my goddess. And now I am a prodigal son to you. And you recall the idea of prodigal son in the Bible, where the son misbehaves and go away and then return to his father as a prodigal. The poet is arguing that the persona in the poem is arguing that he had strayed away to Western civilization, but has now decided to come back to the African goddess, which means, now I have returned, take me. I am ready to serve you. I am ready to be a true African person. So this is a poem that was written in the I think it was written in the 70s, if not maybe 60s or 70s. And since that time, you will find poems like that. If you look at the poetry of the Senegalese poet, Leopold Sédar Senghor, the negritude poet, you know, the idea of negritude. The poet, most of the poetry of the negritude praise Africa, praise the mysticism of Africa, the religion, the way of life, and everything about Africa. So you can see, from this perspective, you can always see the connection between the human and the non-human, and how that has been foundational to our life in Africa. And this has remained till today. As you can see in my own poetry, What the Sea Told Me, I lived near the sea in Senegal in I think 2006. And then I had this feeling of connection with the sea to the extent that sometimes in my dream, I used to see myself inside the sea, and I decided to write a poem about it. So these are issues that, of course, you got. And the poet Niyo Shindare, whom you mentioned, for example, Niyo Shindare has written in his poetry that he has a strong connection with the sun, I mean, with water. His name is called Oshundare. That first part of his name, Oshun is a name of a river goddess.
Oh, mm-hmm.
So that name his first name, Oshun, is a name of a river goddess. So Oshundare is actually a child that was dedicated to the river goddess Oshun. And that is why in one of his interviews, he said that when he was growing up, his mother asked him not to go near the river, not to swim in the river, because she is afraid that the river goddess might take away the son that she gave to him, to her. So the boy should not go near the river. So you can see there is that connection, and that connection has existed with the poet even till today, that he is already an old man. He's still having that connection with the river goddess.
Thank you. Yes, it's interesting to learn that Oshun means river, as you said, right? River goddess. It's the name of a river goddess.
Yes.
What makes me think, what this poetry makes me think about in the European perspective are the modernists, where I recognize also that modernists like T.S. Eliot, for example, and Ezra Pound have recovered some of the symbolism from maybe African cultures and included them also in their poetry. But I really like the metaphor that you said, that you used the biblical metaphor of the prodigal son, and you quoted these lines about the return. Do you think that this kind of return is something that we should wish for the future? And do you think that this kind of revolution and this kind of new way of seeing things can come from Africa, and can Africa be the center and teach the world, in a sense, what its citizens know since centuries and since thousands of years? Or what is your view on this?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, this revolution is already taking place in Africa. Let me tell you that most of the writers, established writers of Nigeria that I know, in fact, not only Nigeria, but Africa, most of the established writers of Africa that I know, and I can mention Aikwe Ama, I can mention Wole Soyinka, I can mention others. Most of them went to colonial schools. Do you get me? They went to Catholic schools, they went to missionary schools, and of course, you know about Ngugi from Kenya. Most of them went to Christian schools. But do you know that after they have gone through the schools and they have traveled out of the country to Europe and they have acquired degrees, when they return to Nigeria or to return to Africa, and when they started writing, they all denounced Christianity and Western civilization. Most of them denounced Christianity. For instance, Wole Soyinka was a Christian when he was a small boy going to school, but when he got his degree and came back to Nigeria, he denounced Christianity and he started worshiping his own traditional god, Ogun. Ogun is the god that Wole Soyinka is attached to. So there are many of them like that. They were civilized by Christian missionary, but when they have become well known, when they have established themselves as writer, they say, well, we are no longer practicing Christianity. We are no longer practicing the Western whatever. We want to practice our African religion, our African tradition. So there are many of them like that. And there are also younger generation of writers like us who have adopted that attitude as well. So most of us do not practice the kind of religion that was handed down to us by the colonial masters. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in other words, most African writers, they return to their goddess. Most African writers return as prodigals to their goddess, to their society. Let's use goddess as a metaphor here. They return to the goddess. Although there are a number of younger African, much younger you can call them, I call them postmodern Nigerian writers who prefer to move out of Nigeria to go to the West, where they will be well known, where they will be more celebrated. So you have writers like Chimamanda Adichie, who are celebrated in the West. I do not know whether they have the capacity to return as prodigals to the traditional society, but I know that Chimamanda as a writer is very passionate about her African background. Mm-hmm. So you can see that you can foresee a situation where in future, most of them will return and want to look inward to do something new and to continue the revolution. The revolution started right from the beginning of Africans' literature. Most African writers from the beginning denounced Western civilization, they denounced Western religion and Eastern religion and held on to their African religion. And some of the writers that are coming up, or some of the writers that are existing in Nigeria today, are also within the same condition of looking inward. I mean, if you read Remiraji's poetry, for instance, you see that he is much concerned about his traditional Yoruba society as well. So this is what we see, and this is a revolution that is already taking place. But the very recent writers that we have are becoming more postmodern. They are becoming more rhizomic. They move about. They try to go out. They try to do something which is like copying more of what is happening in Europe than what is happening in Africa, which is not a good thing for me as far as, a good thing as far as I'm concerned. I believe that as writers, we should learn how to return to our roots and create the kind of revolution that the first generation of African writers created.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Still on the topic on the future, maybe one of my last questions in this very interesting interview is that, how do you see the future in terms of climate change in the sense of the involvement of literature in it? So how can literature keep on contributing, as we know, and what can be the future role of literature, poetry, in spreading a new consciousness about the environment and trying to collaborate together to find common solutions?
Yeah, I think poetry and especially fiction are two genres that are doing great in this regard. In Nigeria too, we have playwrights who are writing drama about climate change and about the condition of the of the non-human. And I think that the future is bright because we have more scholars who are coming up and dealing with questions of eco-criticism, how to link literature and the environment, how to look at the non-human, and the non-human beings that exist in our text. For instance, what we used to consider as a setting of a literary work could be unbundled so that it is no longer a setting, but different life species that exist along with human beings. In Nigeria, as far as I'm concerned, poetry is doing great, because in the Niger Delta region where there's oil extraction, there are a lot of poems that are coming from there talking about environmental justice, about how to give justice to the people, local people that are there. In up north here, there are also poems and stories coming up about the condition of erosion, flooding, desertification, and all of that. It is an aspect that I've been looking at in terms of research, and I know that we are doing a lot. But what I also foresee is that the conversation, which is starting at the local level, will have to connect with the global level, so that we know that climate change is not just a local problem, it is also a global problem. How do we connect, for instance? How do people who are writing about environment in Nigeria connect with people who are writing about environment in Germany, in Poland, in other societies? How can they look at certain commonalities? What are the commonalities, even in spite of the fact that there are specific environmental conditions? Are there common environmental conditions that we can discuss at a global level? These are issues that I think that writers and scholars should be looking at.
Mm-hmm. Right, thank you. So as I understand it, the localities that you are interested in your research, like the local dimensions, they could be then in the next stage, they can become global, can be shared globally, and can be lessons,
exactly.
For everyone. But you suggest to start from the local dimension, right?
Yeah, start from the local, and then from the local, you start a conversation, so that by the time you meet at the global level, everybody has a conversation from their places, so that I do not have to impose my conversation on your own conversation. I do not have to impose my environmental condition on your own self, on you, because you have your own specific environmental condition as well. But we need to also look at areas that they are common to us, that we can deal with.
Certo, volevo farti un'ultima domanda, Michal. Su cosa stai lavorando in questo momento?
Sì, quindi io ho già fatto un'altra intervista con un altro poeta nigeriano, questa volta più giovane, di una generazione più giovane della mia età, Paul Liam, e sto lavorando adesso sull'editing e sui sottotitoli. E lui è stato la mia guida durante il mio viaggio in Nigeria e è anche il cofondatore di Blank Pages. Quindi siamo in un stretto contatto, collaborazione, dialogo, e anche la sua intervista la trovo molto illuminante. Quello che vorrei proporre ancora, e che stavo pensando di proporre ancora, è un'intervista con un'autrice siriana, Lina Atfa, e la sua prospettiva è interessante per varie ragioni, ma la particolarità della sua esperienza sta nel fatto che lei ha fatto il viaggio dalla Siria fino alla Germania come rifugiata, principalmente a piedi, e quindi ha attraversato gli ambienti che dividono la Siria e l'Europa da un'altra prospettiva. Vorrei insomma intervistare anche lei e avere anche una prospettiva di una persona così.